Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me, as always, is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast, but unlike normal episodes, we're not here to review a movie. Today, we're doing a countdown, we're doing a top 10. We're going to be revealing our top 10 science fiction movies of the first half of the 2020s. So 2020 to 2024 is the eligible period. This is one where we are doing a combined list. We sat down and we debated, and we came up with what the Atomic Cinema Experiment top 10 is. So this is not my top 10, this is not David's top 10, this is the Atomic Cinema Experiment top 10. And you can actually see us making the list. There's going to be a bonus video over on the Patreon or via YouTube membership. If you want to check out that and help support the show, you can get access to that. But here, we are going to reveal what the top 10 is, give some reasons, and talk about the films a little bit. We'll keep this spoiler-free, of course, because obviously people may want to check out these movies. It's kind of one of the reasons why you might watch a top 10 in the first place. So, you know, there was a lot to choose from, right? We had like 60-ish movies to kind of pick from this period of time. Now, yes, a good half of them plus were definitely never going to make it, but there was good options.
I was pushing really hard just because it was so worth it to expand it out to Electric State. I really wanted to be able to get that into consideration, but the Academy wasn't hearing it.
Actually, the one that he jokingly tried to push was Borderlands for some reason, just because...
That too.
That's even worse than Electric State, which is... I mean, it is. I don't really want to have to discuss why it is, but it is worse than Borderlands. Or Borderlands is worse than Electric State, I mean to say. Yes.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. One other thing, just top down on this, is that we have done reviews for almost everything that we've done on this list, but there are a few that weren't on this show, and we'll get to those specifically as they come up.
Yeah, there are reviews for them on the channel, just not on this show. So,
without spoiling anything of what that means.
Yes, so we'll point those out when we get there. But you can find full 90-minute to 2-hour discussions of all these movies, right? They're all here, in depth with spoilers and all the rest of it. But we'll get into it. This is kind of a fun one to do. Obviously, we kind of originally planned to do this back in like January, but it kept getting pushed back so we could fit in a few extra things that, you know, might make the list. Just in the off chance that Borderlands surprised us, or that Megalopolis could be this unsung gem that we wanted to promote, but no, alas.
Yeah.
Well, not to spoil anything, maybe it is here. You don't know. Maybe it's number 7.
Yeah. Megalopolis is absolutely number 1. Go check out the review to see why.
All right, first up, number 10 is Prey. So this is the Predator sequel. If you know, I mean, maybe that's using the word sequel loosely, but whatever. At this point, Predator can jump around in time and do whatever. It's after a couple of really rough attempts at trying to do new Predator sequels over the past decade or so, Dan Trachtenberg came in, gave us a Predator movie set in a very different time period with a female lead, and a very different time technologically, you know, so that, you know, all the humans weren't running around with guns. And what few guns do appear are old single-fire muskets and things of that nature. But just a really simple, kind of down-to-basics, like, different idea of what a Predator movie is. And I think the idea of having the sort of the young woman main character who is in a male-dominated world, which you could say that about today's time if you want, if you really want to, but certainly at this time period... Yeah. She's trying to prove herself as a hunter, and kind of almost working that into some of the rules that are already established about Predator is, I think, it's a really smart way of like making it feel like, oh hey, we're using the idea of Predator to like explore some new things that haven't been done in previous Predator movies. And you know, I think it's just a really well directed, solid movie that delivers on the Predator stuff. And hey, it's getting sequels and spin-offs this year, so it clearly did well.
Yeah, no, I think what I like most about it is this idea with Predator beforehand. You always had this sort of underlying thing of superior technology underneath it all, where, like, you know, humans have machine guns and whatnot, and they've got alien energy rifles and whatever. This one, I like how stripped down it gets, and it shows you that it really is all about the hunt. It really is all about just the skill of the person doing it, rather than them just having the better technology or the ability to bring down massive firepower or anything like that. It is really all about the ingenuity of how you become either predator or prey.
Yeah. And it's obviously they could have just called it Predator: Prey, or Predator 5, or Predator: some other subtitle. But Prey is a kind of an inventive title, and I wonder if they sort of return to it, because there is rumors that there's going to be a direct sequel to this one as well, so maybe they'll call that Prey 2. But regardless...
I feel like if they're going to stick with that sort of predator-prey, the only remaining other thing in the food chain would be scavenger.
Yeah, but the next Predator movie is called Predator Badlands, so they're back to Predator for that. True. So I think if they're going to go back to the title Prey, it'll be specifically for following this time period or this character. I would assume, but
yeah, or they could use Prey as kind of the everything set in the past, everything that is prior to Predator 1.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes some sense. So no, just a really solid movie that sticks to the basics and is like, hey, we didn't make it weird by trying to do this thing where there's a super predator, or we didn't make it like we're just retreading the first movie with like nothing but homages to do. There's a couple of homages in this that are kind of sly, don't get me wrong, it's not completely absent, but it feels like it's got its own story, it's got a main character that it wants to focus on. Arguably, out of any of the Predator movies, it probably has the most developed main character, right? And I'm not saying that, like Predator 1's still the best movie in the franchise. I'm not saying that it isn't. But I'm saying that, like, Arnold's character in Predator doesn't have quite the same, like, arc or, like, this central, like, focus of, like, we're supposed to care about the main character in this movie. We're supposed to root for her. She's the underdog. You can't say that about, like, other characters in this franchise. In fact, the last couple of movies, most of the characters are a bit unlikable, frankly. Prey stands out for just being able to bring something back. Then when the Alien movies are struggling to have another good entry, although the opinion's a bit split on Romulus, I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll show up higher on this list.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Clearly, we're gonna we love them bringing back all of the same exact things over and over and over again. Totally.
I'm actually realizing we never even mentioned that movie's name when we were discussing what to put on this list.
Yeah.
Never even
it's
came
far
up.
enough down. It didn't really matter.
Yeah, it's a shame. Anyway, number 9 is The Beast. So this is an interesting one. This is Léa Seydoux's in this, and it's partially in French, partially in English, and it's almost a bit difficult to say what I should tell you about the premise, because it kind of plays it close to the chest, and part of the movie is sort of figuring out what it is. I guess the one thing I will say is that part of it is set in the future. I will say that.
Yes.
And then everything else you kind of figure out as the movie's going on. But it definitely has a good sense of variety to it, because there's like these different segments that take place in very different locations and scenarios. It feels unique in how it presents its idea, and it also kind of it tackles some core science fiction themes, which I'm dancing around because it is such an unknown going into it. Because I remember us discussing this when we reviewed it and being like, we genuinely weren't sure in the opening like 15-20 minutes of the movie, is it going to be this type of sci-fi movie? Is it going to be this type of sci-fi movie? But needless to say, by the time we got to the end, it was kind of pulling some interesting gut punches, and even tackling some kind of difficult subjects about like the darker side of humanity, but at the same time kind of, touching on those ideas of like people keeping their humanity and not giving up parts of what make them themselves and things like that. And I'm being as vague as I possibly can here. But there's definitely a moment though where halfway through this movie it jumps to like what the second half of the movie is, and it's such a weird, interesting like pivot where we just go to like, I'll just say the male lead of the film is just performing by himself, and it's like, what are we doing now? This is weird. But it all makes sense as it goes on.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I like about this one the most, is just at least for me, I was very confused by the start of this movie, not just because it didn't feel like it was a standard fare sci-fi movie, but also I didn't feel like I knew where to direct my attention. I didn't feel like I knew, is this something that I should be emotionally invested in? Is this something that is just going to go by the wayside? But as the movie progressed, I felt like I almost was tricked into giving my emotional investment. Like by the time we hit a certain point, I found myself really caring about these characters, and I couldn't even point to exactly why. Like what exactly made me care about them so deeply. And like you said, by the time we hit the second half, it gives you such a roller coaster of, and now we're doing this. You're like, oh, all right, well, I trust you, movie. I'm into it. Let's go. Let's see what we do with it.
Yeah, I mean, even the opening of the movie is so kind of abstract. You're like, what is the context of this? Especially since the movie starts with, like, basically it's the character in front of a green screen, and they're being given directions how to act effectively. And it's not a meta thing. It's not like, oh, this is meant to be the making of the movie. But, like, after, like, the title screen, it, like, we're in, like, a different time period, and we're like, all of a sudden we're in, like, France, and it's, like, I don't know, like, you know, we're at, like, a fancy
it's like
gala.
Revolutionary France, yeah.
And people are in all these big, fluffy dresses and whatnot. It's like, what's going on? And
I mean, yeah, just from that premise, you would assume sort of things of like, okay, well, you got that bit with the green screen before. Maybe all this is just like a Matrix sort of thing. Maybe all this is just like a stage play. And we are throwing out all those ideas, and none of them are right, but also kind of sort of right. It's so in depth with its high concept stuff.
Yeah. But it's definitely pivoting a bit more towards the art house side of sci-fi. So if you're someone who wants your blockbusters or whatever, this isn't that. But if you want something that's going to make you think a little bit, and, you know, I'll put it this way. If I tell you the title, The Beast, is not literal, there's not an actual monster, if that's something that sounds like you like that's not a literal thing, then you're going to probably get into the movie. If you are annoyed that there's not a literal monster, then you're probably going to hate the movie. And
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think that would be my way. But it definitely stuck with me. I was thinking about it a lot after we did it. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's got a little bit of a, I don't want to say ceiling to it. It's barrier of entry, I guess, because like we said, a lot of it is also just in French language. So if you're the type that doesn't like subtitles or whatnot, that might also not be for you. But I think enough of it is done in English that it's understandable.
It's pretty 50-50, honestly, by the end, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's number 9. Number 8 is The Creator. So this is the film where, yeah, so it's obviously it's a dystopian cyberpunk film where robots exist, and it's kind of this story of an adult bonding with a robot boy, right? That's the most basic premise I could probably give it. And there's like a lot of stuff in here about the rights of the robots, and like the idea that there's a kind of a war. Like the robots have effectively been made illegal because of a tragedy that happens in the backstory. But it's going into a lot of these ideas where, you know, characters have lost people and they're kind of like finding new connections, and there's kind of this, like, you know, the breakdown of a really stoic character who's like, you know, was never going to like feel any emotions again, but finally finds himself actually caring about some things. You've got a lot of those elements at play. So it's not necessarily the most original thing ever, but the execution and the cinematography and the effects and like how convincing the world is what really made it feel like it stuck out to me. And that's why and this is Gareth Edwards, who did 2014 Godzilla, did Monsters, also did Rogue One, which I don't really like very much. This to me felt like it was him returning to like the sort of things that I like him doing, which is like, none of his movies are perfect, but they always seem to tap into like some cool ideas and like visuals that I really get into, and I'm always quite happy with by the time I've gotten to the end of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I would say even for Rogue One, there's obviously that one's a little bit more hit or miss, but I think a lot of what his movies manage to do is create this convincing backdrop for the story to go into. And the story itself can be maybe hit or miss, but like the world itself that is built in always feels convincing. It always manages to get you, even through the most minor, tiny things. Like a lot of what this movie does is every once in a while they'll have like a little monologue sequence, a little reading or something. Well, they'll just show you shots of the world. And it's such small little things, such small things that they decide to focus on. But that's the most convincing element to get you to buy into how much they thought about this world and how much they really built it from the ground up to make it this convincing thing. And then, yeah, like you're saying, special effects wise, it's top tier. Like, it does a great job of compositing together the real life stuff they're filming and the special effects stuff on top of it.
Yeah, and even the design of the various the tech things, the main robots, of course, but even just like there's like more droid kind of ones that are more basic. All of it kind of works really well. It feels, you know, a little gritty, a little bit lived in, all that kind of good stuff. I think what surprised me as well as watching it is that, like, I was kind of enjoying it for the most part, like for the first half of the movie, and thinking, okay, this is working well enough, but I don't know if I'm that connected to like the characters necessarily. But there's definitely some big moments in the third act where I'm like, oh, they're kind of winning me over here about caring about the character like arcs, where there's some big emotional moments that are very cinematic, where it'll do something where, you know, there's like, oh, a moment of bonding or a moment of where someone's in peril and the other one has to help them, where I'm like, oh, I'm actually really starting to give a shit about this connection between these characters now. So it, you know, it, like any faults that it felt like it might have had early on, it was kind of winning me over the more it went on for the most part. So
yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, so that's the creator. That's number 8. You know, I would say it's maybe a little divisive. I don't think people loved it, but you know, it did get a lot of praise as well.
Yeah, for me, this kind of felt like it was in that same sort of boat as Rogue One. Like, it's in that same sort of vein of, you got some people who are really championing it, but a lot of people are just kind of, well, all right, it was good to look at, I guess. Like, it has its positives, but I think critical consensus was a little split.
Yeah, much better than Rogue One, I'll say that.
Oh yeah, it's weird that was like 95% of the marketing, but I guess that's just what was out at that point. They were like, from the director of Rogue One comes thing that's not Rogue One. It
was absolutely the big. I mean, it would be weird for them not to also say Godzilla, because that's something the public would also recognize. But
right.
Well, whatever. So that's the creator. Number 7 is The Invisible Man. So this is a movie that we did on Screams After Midnight, not the Atomic Cinema Experiment, because it is also a horror movie. But Invisible Man's always been science fiction. In fact, I mean, David's not done his homework yet, but me and Tara did do all the classic Invisible Mans as part of this show, because I do think they tend to lean more sci-fi than horror, because they tend to be a little like dark comedy almost with sci-fi. That tends to be, you know, because he gets up to some hijinks and that's part of the fun of it. This one is more horror though, and it kind of specifically takes some modern ideas, which is that it takes the idea of an ex-boyfriend who has somehow developed the ability to be invisible, which I won't spoil how he does it here. Yeah, that's something you can find out in the movie. But this idea of like a gaslighting taken to like 100, where someone is abusing their ex-girlfriend and stalking them, but no one can believe her because no one can see that it's happening, is such a good idea of taking that threat and the fear that victim would feel and like amplifying it by like 100, because he could be anywhere, literally at any time.
It's the idea of, I mean, again, having not seen The Invisible Man previous ones, I imagine there's at least one character who is trying to convince another character of, hey, no, there was really a guy here. Like, you got to believe me. And it's basically like, well, what if the movie is about that character instead? What if that's the protagonist? How do we structure it from there? And it comes out as just a great way of constantly keeping your audience on edge, because at any given point in any given frame, you're just expecting to see something move in the background, because he could always be there, and you're now in the place of the main character at that point, the paranoia and everything else that goes with it.
And even just in a symbolic sense, there's a great element to this, which is this idea that if someone's been in some sort of abusive relationship and they've gotten out of it, this idea that it lingers over them, and it's like they're always scared of it somehow coming back. Like, you hear stories about people who get out of situations who are always terrified that, oh, they'll catch up to them. It's something they have to live with for a long time, maybe forever. And this is literally making her do that. So it feels like it's thematically sinking really well into the themes that it's playing with. And it's a match made in heaven, honestly. As far as like the themes that it's exploring and the concept of the Invisible Man, they go together so well that it's a genius script, like, for putting them together. It's really, really well done and smart. And then obviously you've got Elizabeth Moss doing a great job in the lead role. You've got Lee Winnell directing, who I've not seen it yet. The reception to his Wolfman movie from this year has been very lukewarm, but he's definitely been impressive as a director since he made his debut with Insidious Chapter 3. He's very much stayed in the horror realm. This one just happens to also be sci-fi. But this is his best movie, though, right? I say that. We actually did one of his movies on Ace. We did Upgrade, which was not perfect, but had a lot of like cool, like you could sort of tell, oh, this director's got some juice. Like, you know, let him cook, and he's got more in him. And I think this was like, you know, that his next logical step was to get to this. This really felt like he was delivering in all his potential as a filmmaker. So, really good.
Yeah, I remember specifically because I did Invisible Man much more recently than a lot of other movies on this list. But I remember there were a few shots in it where the camera like follows a person as they fall down, and I'm like, that's Upgrade. I'm seeing Upgrade linking into that.
A little bit of Upgrade, yeah. So yeah, super easy to recommend this one. I think it's a really good reinvention of one of those old Universal monster ideas that never for a second just feels like, oh, we're doing like homages to the old classic character. No, this is just like taking the concept and doing a completely original thing with it.
That being said, I'm sure, like, again, having not seen it, I'm sure that there are tons like little winks and nods in the background of like back to the original Invisible Man stuff.
I don't know if there is. I don't remember them being a ton. Maybe there's a couple of really small, like, you know, blinking you'll miss it, or like you'll have to really look for it type things. I don't remember there being anything super obvious.
Fair enough.
But yeah, there you go. That's number 7, The Invisible Man. Number 6 is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. A movie that defied the odds. And what are those odds? Those odds are that prequels suck. They usually almost always suck. But Furiosa did not suck. It was actually very good and was a riveting watch. It gave us a lot of the action that, you know, you expect from one of these movies. Honestly, the only thing against that you could possibly say is that Mad Max Fury Road was so damn perfect that there's no way this was ever going to match it exactly. And it doesn't.
Yeah.
But goddamn, it gets a lot closer than most prequels would have ever any right to. And it does it by being different, by not just trying to mimic what that movie did. Like the title implies, it's a saga. It starts off with her as a kid. It goes through different stages of her life. And it's pretty riveting, honestly. And there's a couple of really standout action sequences.
Yeah, no, I think the comparison to Mad Max was really what I was the most concerned with going into this one, because we did see it in theaters. I think my biggest concern was, okay, you've got Mad Max Fury Road, and that came out, like, what was it, 8 years prior when this was released? Even longer than that? So it had been some time already, and not only that, you were banking on the idea of a second lead, I'll say, but still a side character, not Max, being the one to be able to sell this well enough. So already it felt like the cards were stacked against it, but then you went into it, you saw it, and I think for probably a good 90% of the movie, it really worked. It really was doing a great job at taking this side character and fleshing them out and giving them a place in this larger world. And that's the other part of it is Fury Road, you always got this sense of the larger mythology at play, and this fleshed it out just a little bit more on top of that, and it made it a lot more engaging because of it. So if anything, I view this as a solid addition on top of Fury Road, where it makes both of them better by this one existing.
Yeah, and George Miller, the director of both movies, all the Mad Max movies, in fact, he... From the sounds of it, like, had this mapped out and all this mythology that's in this movie, he had when he made Fury Road. Like, he'd already, like, figured it out, and it was just sort of backstory he didn't put in. And then, so, and it's one of these things where one of my big complaints with prequels often is that when it tries to flesh out things, it often feels like, oh, it's just a way to sort of, like, do all these callbacks and do all these things. And you never believe, when you watch the Star Wars prequels, you never really believe George Lucas had thought of all these things the way they are in these movies when he was making the original trilogy or writing the original trilogy. But when we saw Furiosa and he's explaining the backstory behind, like, you know, the Bullet Farm and Gastown and Oasis?
The last one.
Yeah. Morton Joe's place.
Yeah.
The Citadel? Is that what they called it?
Yes, Citadel. That's it.
Right. like when he's fleshing all that out, I'm like, oh, this all just like makes sense, and it's like making it all work, and it felt like enough of this must have been there in the DNA when you were fleshing all this out before you even made Fury Road. And sadly, because the one thing that maybe links up to what you were just saying there is that financially, yeah, selling this movie on Furiosa didn't do well because it didn't make enough money to justify any more movies, which is a shame because he was planning another one. He was planning on doing Mad Max The Wasteland, and it's a shame we're never going to get that now probably because this one didn't, it didn't completely bomb, but it didn't, make the bucks. It didn't make the mega money. So here we are. I mean,
if there's one thing I know about Mad Max, it's never think that it's over. It's always going to keep coming back.
That is probably true, but Miller is like 80, so I don't know if it's going to happen with him being able to be the one to come back and do it, sadly.
Yeah, that's fair.
Which is a shame.
Yeah, there was one other thing. I'm blanking on what it was now, but there was one other thing I wanted to bring up, but never mind.
I'll add in one thing here, is I loved the villain because he was so different from Immortan Joe, and he was kind of shit at being a villain, but that was part of his character, and it made him like such an interesting villain, because he was so petty and like juvenile about things. I don't know, it was a really interesting character that they concocted for the villain. It made him really dislikable in a good way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I just remember what I was going to say is relating to the idea of the prequels and like all that sort of stuff. This movie felt like it was just telling the story, and we never really had the moments of like, oh, here's how this specific thing that you saw in, like, we never saw like, here's why Immortan Joe is looking like this or doing this or that in any way that felt unnatural. Like they might have still had those moments, but it felt like it was part of the larger story and not a little detour we had to make just to explain that one bit.
No, everything it brings up, it feels like it has to bring up because it is a part of Furiosa's journey, and there's no way around it. And even the one moment, I think you could argue, does feel like they put something in for the, hey, we want to do a wink and a nod. Like, it weirdly, I think, worked better than it had any right to, because I had a thematic reason for it. Whether people agree with that is up to you, but I think it basically dodges a lot of the criticisms by always feeling like everything that's there is for the purpose of the story it's telling, and it doesn't just feel like we're doing a checklist of, okay, we have to set up this, we have to set up that. And hey, half these things we didn't set these things up, so we have to have characters quickly change them at the end of the last movie. Sorry, I'm getting into Revenge of the Sith complaints again.
What? No, couldn't possibly be.
Yeah, but that movie still sucks, by the way.
Wow, I've never seen the dislike counter go up so quickly.
Revenge of the Sith sucks. It's a garbage movie, and you ain't changing my goddamn mind. Anyway, number 6 was Furiosa, Mad Max Saga. Number 5 is
Rise of Skywalker.
Shut up. Number 5 is that's not eligible. That was 2019 anyway.
Oh, was it? Fair enough.
That's how long it's been since the last Star Wars. Well, was that the last? Yeah, it was the last Star Wars movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
we haven't had the capper to Mandalorian and all that yet. Yeah. That would be the next one.
We know what the next one we're doing is, though. It's going to be Star Wars Starfighter in 2027, I think they said.
It's not far enough out, but we'll get there.
Anyway, number 5 is River. You're probably saying, what the hell is that? That's fair enough. It's not the most like eye-catching title ever, but this is a movie from Japan, which is a time loop movie. But there's a couple of unique elements to it. Unique element number 1 is that every character is aware of the time loop, right? So that's already very unique versus other time loop movies. Number 2, the time loop only lasts 2 minutes. That's also very unique. Number 3. Every single loop is done in one take. So from a filmmaking perspective, there's something interesting going on to enjoy. It's a fairly light-hearted sci-fi comedy. It's got likable characters. It's them kind of trying to figure out the chaos, and everyone's kind of it's all set around this small village where there's a hotel, and it's like the staff and the guests that are freaking out and like trying to figure out what's going on. Just delightful and inventive.
Yeah.
It would be a disservice to not also mention the other film by the same team with the same director, writer, a lot of the same actors, which is called Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes, which is, again, a 2-minute sort of time mechanic movie which they made first. Now, we've picked River to go on here because we think River's just a little bit more refined. But honestly, if you like River, go check out that as well, because they pair very well together, and they're very inventive. It feels like, you know, this low budget group of people just want to be creative and come up with some things. And yeah, you could really go through it with a snooty attitude and like pick apart some like little plot holes or something if you want to. But it's just so endearing that I can't imagine most people can just watch this and have a good time with the energy it has, because that's the thing the single takes do, is they give every look this sense of energy. So
yeah,
it's super exciting.
No, I mean, I was absolutely pushing for, and I had his name up here, Junta Yamaguchi, I believe was the director's name. Yes. One of these movies I knew had to be on the top 10, just because it's, as much as I am far confessed, I love time loop, I love time travel movies, anything that messes with time, because I feel like those force the creators to be creative. They force them to think outside the box of normal narrative storytelling. And I think this is the prime example of that. This is absolutely somebody who crafted this story in such a creative way to be able to make this mechanic work and yet still be able to tell a narratively satisfying story from beginning to end. Not just for even our main leads, but like, you got a character who is stuck in the bathroom the whole time, and you have like a pair of characters who get into a fight, and you see like they're unable to separate from each other because at the beginning of the time loop they were together, so they are constantly still there. It's a great way to set up this sort of mechanic and play with it in all of the imaginable ways of how they can make it work. So I really do enjoy this one. Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes is also great, but this one I think had that little bit of extra heart to it that just pushes it over the edge of making it something really special. That being said, I think the ending is going to be very divisive. Without spoiling what it is, the reveal as to what happens, I think you are either going to love it or you're going to hate it.
I mean, I think the thing I'd say, and this goes for both River and Beyond Infinite 2 Minutes, is that the reveals of why things are happening is not what the movie's that interested in. So they're kind of just, you know, they're kind of light. They're kind of like, hey, here's a reason, because we need a reason, but it's not the important part. So I would say just have that in mind going in, and don't think that that's going to be like a big, cool reveal that's going to blow your socks off. What this movie is really about is the fun of all the characters dealing with the time loops and freaking out about it, and how they change as they try to do different things, and so on and so on. So, yeah, highly recommended for that. This came out in 2022 or 2023? 23?
2023.
Right.
Yep.
Because obviously the title of River makes it a little harder to find, so make sure you're checking the director and whatnot.
It's far easier to go through Beyond the Infinite 2 Minutes and just get to it that way.
Yeah, click on the director from that and get it from there. But that is number 5, River. Number 4 is Everything Everywhere All at Once. The big Michelle Yeoh multi-dimensional hopping movie with hot dog fingers and other such things.
Yes, it's very quirky, Pete. We know.
Yeah, I mean, I like this movie quite a bit. I understood its success at the time. I was pretty positive on it. And there's definitely some great moments in there about kind of, you know, because it focuses on this, like, you know, Michelle Yeoh's like, you know, in her 50s or whatever, and like she's a married woman in the movie, and it kind of goes in this idea of like, what could her life have been if it had went a different way in all these other dimensions, and it kind of, there's a lot of heart to the movie about like her reconnecting with her daughter and her husband in different ways, and there's a lot of style to it as well. That said, though, you push for this to be this high. I was quite happy for this to be lower on the list, if not even just not quite making it. But you really fought for it, and that's why it's here at the place that it is. So you can take it from here.
No, I mean, I one of the things that you were saying when we were discussing this, obviously, you can check out that video on Patreon, is that it kind of overstays its welcome just a little bit too long. And to that, I would agree. I do think that this movie is a bit longer than it needs to be. However, that the messages being said here, the ideas that they're trying to get across, and especially this earnestness to it, this idea that it is about a woman who is past her prime, may not have made all the best choices in her life, is regretting a lot of the choices she did make, is just generally unhappy. And essentially opening up the multiverse to her and saying like, okay, take a look around. And it isn't played out in a sort of Christmas Carol-esque, here's, you know, the choices you made then, and here's your future yet to come, or all that sort of thing. It shows her like, yeah, no, some of your other lives are fantastic. Like, you are like greater than the way you are now in pretty much every other reality. But it's the way that she uses that for her own self-reference, her own ability to look at herself, see what all she does have, and be able to come to terms with that. And obviously, it makes 1,000 different twists and turns along the way to keep that sort of quirky atmosphere. But a lot in the same way that I appreciate a good time travel movie, I also appreciate this because, again, it's creative storytelling. It's a very basic story being told, but with this fantastical lens over top of it that, honestly, I think that the quirkiness of it, again, right up until it overstays its welcome, is fresh the whole way through. It's something that you don't see in this level of a blockbuster where it's able to keep up this level of comedy without coming down to the lowest common denominator stuff that you would get out of like your Electric States and stuff like that. This feels very fresh, a breath of fresh air for, I think, honestly, for most of everything that we were coming out of with the pandemic. I think that's kind of what hit me so hard, is that it felt like, no, this is exactly what I needed to see at this period of time to be able to feel like there is still some freshness, still something new going on here rather than the same mundanity every day.
Yeah. You know, I do have some critiques of the back half feeling like it kind of, I don't want to say goes in circles, but I feel like we didn't have to hop between as many multiverses or universes as we do. But
right,
you know, it's just one of those things where I got to the end of the movie and I still quite liked it, but I definitely loved like the first like half hour, 40 minutes as it was like setting things up. I was really into, and then there's some great moments in the back half when like the emotional resolutions kind of come around and stuff, but I definitely found myself like being like, oh, I'm not in love with this like I was at the start. I think it kind of waned on me a little bit. So, you know, for me, it's not as enthusiastic, but this is our joint list. You fought for it. This was the one you were championing as much as you could. So,
yeah,
here it is at number 4.
I mean, I will flat up say I never expected this to be number 1. I wouldn't want it as number 1, but it's deserves to be at least in the top 5. So I'm happy that it got here.
All right, number 3 is Nope. So this is the other movie on this top 10 that was a Screams After Midnight movie. Now, what's interesting is that I think I had decided when this, like, it's some, because I wasn't sure, because when the trailers were coming out, I'm like, oh, is this a Screams movie? Is it an Ace movie? I think I actually decided that it was an Ace movie. Like, I looked at it and said, I think, you know what? This is something UFO related. I think regardless of how horror it is, it's sci-fi first, regardless of anything else. And it was actually Tara at the time who said, do it on Screams. For whatever the reason was at the time. I do not recall. But it ended up being on Screams. And at the very least, there was some lineage there, because me and Tim had done other Jordan Peele movies. So there was like, okay, we've got experience with the director. It feels like a natural fit anyway. But it was done on Screams After Midnight, or Horror Movie Podcast, if you've not checked that out. I do that with Tim. Go check that out. But, like, Jordan Peele obviously hit the ground with Get Out. Everyone praised that. It was a very inventive film that tackled some very specific subjects. Obviously, racism, but very specifically this idea of, like, I don't know, like, liberal racism, I guess, or, you know, like, just this, you know...
It's the idea of not being racist, but still saying things about race.
That makes,
like, it's this weird thing.
Yeah, it got into this nitty gritty, and it felt like a very personal thing that could have only came from that point of view. You know, like, you know, it had to be a black person directing that movie to make it hit all those little points that it hit, and it's, you know, it's very, very cool and very, very inventive. And then Us came out, and it's really well directed, but some of the plot decisions did leave me feeling a bit wanting, and that was kind of the feeling. I think it was divisive. I'll say that when it came out. And then Nope was coming out, and it looked cool. The buzz was pretty good as well. And what's so weird about it is that after I saw it, I basically said, you know what? That was Jaws, but it was a UFO in the sky instead of a shark in the water. But it follows kind of the structure of Jaws in a lot of ways. and it gave me a solid set of compelling lead characters who I kind of like bouncing off of each other. So that's, point number one. But for me, the big thing is not just the idea that we've got themes. A big subject in the movie is the idea of how entertainment uses animals and like the knock-on effect of that. But it's more just this idea of we get to build up to what this thing is. It's a little bit weird and different, and you get to have these big cinematic shots. Like there's, again, without spoiling anything, there's a moment where it's in the rain and there's a flash of lightning, and you kind of see it like in a way that you hadn't seen it up until that point, and it's like, holy shit, like it's these big cinematic bits. But my favorite thing about the movie, honestly, is just the idea of like learning the rules and the characters becoming aware of like, okay, why is it here? What can we do to try and get around it? Can we use anything we've learned about how it works or how it operates or what it's doing to try and like either fight back or like, save the day or whatever it might be? And a lot of like the back half of the movie is like, okay, we've got this, and this information. Let's try and do something with it. And it's about the characters being proactive. And I really appreciate that in general in science fiction and horror anyway. But I think here it's a lot of fun because it really becomes, to compare it again to Jaws, it's them going out in the boat and saying, okay, we're going to go hunt the shark. We basically have that in the last act of this movie in a slightly different way, of course. But it's, but it also works into the themes of like using creatures we don't understand and tempting fate. Because there's a whole bit of backstory about an accident on a sitcom that had a chimpanzee that is all this idea of like, oh, if you try and work with a beast, you never really quite know. And in fact, the main characters, their whole thing is that they rent out horses to movie productions, and that's like a big theme of the movie. So,
yeah, I really did like this movie. Obviously this was the one that you were pushing for a little bit harder than I was.
Yeah.
I thought this should have been a bit lower down, but the one thing I really did like about it is that central theme of man keeit's on trying to tame things that it just can't tame.
Yeah.
It keeps on trying to take these things and bend them to its will. And it's every once in a while, it just makes it so like a tragedy happens or something awful results from it. And I like that viewpoint of it. The reason I wasn't so keen on it is it's pretty much the opposite of what you were saying there. Is I think that the stuff with like the sitcom, the stuff with like the idea of hunting it and stuff, I really did enjoy. I think was solid, but every once in a while it got just a little bit too deep in the weirdness for me. And I liked it when it was a bit more grounded, a bit closer to the Jaws aspect, more so than the fantastical sci-fi. But again, I recognize that might just be a me thing in that, where when it got a bit too weird, I was just like, well, all right, you're taking me out of this kind of more grounded adventure here with these characters to become something else. So that's my only thing that was keeping it down for me. But I do still think it was a very well-made movie. I think the alien design was fantastic as well. When we get that reveal, it's all done in a very interesting way.
Yeah. It's something as simple as like the first time you get a glimpse of anything is you just see something moving between clouds, and it's like, oh shit, I noticed that. There's something there. And this idea it could be anywhere above you is kind of cool and adds to a lot of suspense and whatnot. So, yeah, that's Nope at number 3. Number 2. Never doubt Jim Cameron. Avatar: The Way of Water is number 2.
Yep.
Never doubt Jimmy C. No, I like the first Avatar quite a bit. It was a good experience seeing that when it came out in 2009, when I was 20 years old, because that's how big of a gap there was between movies. That's the wild thing. Avatar 1 came out, it's not even eligible for a 2010s list because it came out in the end of the 2000s, and here we are in the 2020s. But Way of Water, I think, was an improvement in just about every way, right? Obviously, technology's advanced, and that doesn't mean a whole lot for a lot of movies, because a lot of movies just do what they can get away with now with effects, and it's kind of annoying and disappointing. But this is a Jim Cameron movie, so he's pushing the effects as far as they can go. So it's the cutting edge. You're seeing beautiful parts of Pandora, the water, all that stuff they've added. They add the children characters, which most movies, like franchises, when you add kids, it's like, oh, this is going to be terrible. But honestly, they're the best part of the movie. They're better than the pair. Like, this whole story about it being about the kids and, like, you know, what the adults can learn from them, and it did almost feel like, hey, in a couple of movies' time, if we get to Avatar 5, like, we could have killed off the original character. We could just have the kids as the main characters grown up at that point, and I think it would work. But the big thing for me is that he's so good with the spectacle, he's so good at building the world and all that stuff, but it's how earnest it is. It's how much it's telling a relatively simple, some might argue like cheesy story, but it's taken itself just the right amount of like seriousness to feel like, no, the characters believe in what's happening, they're worried, they're scared, they're, you know, feeling love or excitement, and you can buy into it because it's happening, and they care about it. There's no quips, there's no, oh, can you believe how crazy this is that's happening? There's no like undermining its own plot with nonsense.
Giant alien whale breaches, lands next to them. Someone turns the camera. Yeah, that just happened.
So I think it's just really solid storytelling, and I think when you get to that third act, and the action's phenomenal in the third act, of course, because you expect it would be. But once you get to that point, and it's sort of done some interesting things with the characters and like who's going after who, what their motivations are. It's all pretty interesting stuff. It's all stuff that's engaging, and like sets up this idea of like the young characters try to prove themselves and try and like make their own way and discover their own things, but then ultimately, you know, that gets them into a bit of danger, and then so on and so on. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, it feels like true science fiction in the sense where it really feels that we're seeing another world. And yeah, a lot of it's like 95% CG, and that's why, but like,
right,
it's really high quality CG. So
yeah, I mean, I would put this in a similar boat for me with The Creator, where obviously, you know, that was a lot of special effects heavy. This one is as well. Like you said, James Cameron, God, he loves his water. He will do anything to make water look good. It is absolutely a special effects masterpiece in terms of, even if you look back at the original Avatar, where that was being lauded for its amazing special effects, like this is already 10 steps above that. It does a great job of making everything here, pun intended, flow properly. And I think, again, the only ding that you can put against the Avatar franchise as a whole is that the stories are, like you said, a bit simplistic. It's, you know, the first one was compared to things like Pocahontas and other such like saving the environment sort of stories. This one is a bit more creative, but what I think this one does a lot more is it gets me more pumped up than I think the first one did for more adventures. Like you said, setting up the family, and with us knowing that Avatar 77 is already on the docket, it's actually doing a lot more for me, thinking like, okay, if he has this broader story in mind, if he has this idea of where he wants to go with these characters, he's done a good job of making me care about them enough here that I am a lot more interested in seeing how they could turn off in later movies, because each of them are given their own individual thing. It's not like any character is kind of sitting in the background as the passenger to some other character's story. They're all given pathos. They're all given this definition to them that makes it going to be an interesting ride moving forward. And I would say even in this movie, the development of that pathos, the development of knowing where these characters are going to go is interesting in its own right to see where they end up. So yeah, it's managing to get a more in-depth character base that I think, even if the story itself is a bit predictable and simplistic as to where it's going, the eagerness that you have to see these characters evolve and where they're going to end up is enough to keep you engaged the whole way.
Yeah, they're just super captivating. And, you know, I think all these new characters, the kid characters, I'm so into like their characters by the end of the movie. And they've already kind of established relationships between them that can grow in future movies, even some things that they set up that aren't paid off in Way of Water. And not because, like, it doesn't, and it never feels like, oh, they should have paid that off and didn't. It just feels like, no, this is a series of movies. He's got, like, a map in his head of, like, you know, I mean, I'm pretty sure he's got scripts for 3, 4, and 5 already done. Like, he knows where he's going with this stuff, and it feels like it's setting stuff up. Even, you know, one of the things that I rolled my eyes at a little bit when I first found out it was going to happen before the movie came out was the idea that Quaritch, Stephen Lang's character, was going to somehow be back. But even that, by the end of the movie, I'm like, by the end of this one in particular, I mean, I was like, oh, clearly there's a larger plan here for what that character is going to be over the course of like this whole thing. And I think I know where it's going, and it might be exactly what I think it is. But even if it is, like, I kind of trust that Cameron's going to make it all compelling because he's very good at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you look back at something like, T2, like, it's a boy and his dog story. You kind of get where it's going from the beginning. You get the ideas it's doing, but that doesn't mean you don't care any less about the relationship between the characters and how they develop.
Yeah, like, I think, like, Avatar, I still like a lot. I did. But it was clearly not in his pantheon of, like, Terminator, Aliens, The Abyss, T2, right? Some people might throw in Titanic and True Lies, but I think those are a little bit of a step down from those four, right? Those four are his big four. And I'm not saying that Way of Water is better than any of those four movies, but I do think it's above True Lies and Titanic. I think it's much closer to those four in his heyday than what he did after. So that's exciting to me. And don't get me wrong, I love True Lies, so it's not like if you give me something True Lies levels, I'm upset.
Right.
But it's that's like a fun little romp of a movie. It feels like he's doing something a bit more like this is definitely more family friendly in a lot of ways, but it is adventurous. So he's not trying to do the gritty sci-fi of Terminator. He's not trying to do, if anything, The Abyss is the closest, just because The Abyss has an ultimately pretty uplifting kind of sensibility to it. But this is definitely James Cameron doing the closest thing he'll ever do to a Star Wars. It's like, this is my sci-fi like universe with my aliens and my spaceships and my stuff. That's what I'm doing. And yeah, it's hard not to get like caught up in like the excitement of it, because like, he's very good at doing that.
Yeah, the only thing that I could even think that this franchise could go to that I would be a bit iffy on is actually exploring like other planets. Like we have Earth and we have Pandora, and we haven't even really seen Earth. Like it's pretty much just Pandora.
That's the one thing I would like to see eventually is Earth. And not other planets. I don't want to explore anywhere else. But I think at some point we should do Earth, right? Not the whole movie, but like Earth should be a prominent feature in one of the sequels, I would say. But
yeah, just enough to see why we had to come to Pandora to begin with. Like,
it's funny.
What is it?
Because when everyone talks about Avatar and its like success versus its place in pop culture, and I've had these discussions before about how, it's not like other franchises where Jake Sully and Neytiri are like big pop culture icons the same way that a Star Wars character is, or a Terminator character is, even to use one of Cameron's own things, or a Ripley from Alien or whatever. It doesn't feel like it's in the pop culture zeitgeist in quite the same way. But people were saying that before Way of Water, and then Way of Water did really well. I do almost wonder, is that still going to be true? Are those statements still going to be true by the time 5 is out? Like, because I already feel like 2 makes me care a lot more about the characters, and I wonder if when you look at it as a whole by the time it's done, if it all comes out and it all sticks in the landing, which is, these are big ifs, but I also, like I started with, never doubt James Cameron.
I do think a big part of it is release schedule. It's hard to stay in the zeitgeist when you have a difference of like 13 years between releases. If he does stay up to date and does release one every like 3 years, as is the current trend, as is the current projection, more or less, then I think it could enter a bit more into the zeitgeist. I think a bit more would be talked about it in terms of this is the next big entry. But if it stays as spaced out as it has been, then yeah, it's just going to be impossible to stay in the thoughts of people for that long.
Yeah, I don't know if it'll ever. I don't think it'll ever have the same.
It's never gonna have Star Wars levels or anything.
No. But I don't think it's ever going to have like characters who are held up with these other big icons of cinema, or even like specifically science fiction. And maybe that's just because like it does feel like it's built on these other ideas that are already well explored. But I do think the experience of Avatar and Way of Water specifically, I think there's a reason why Disney built like an Avatar land before they even owned it, right? This was before they even owned Fox, because they saw potential in people wanting to visit Pandora and the magic of that. So it feels like it's tapping into something. It's kind of like I don't know, like it's like a little bit aged up from what Disney stuff is, but it's not like a gritty sci-fi, so it's kind of something like, oh, the whole family can go and enjoy Pandora. So there's kind of this in-between element to it that I think works.
I honestly think that is part of the reason why they do have $1 billion so easily, is because like parents aren't even questioning whether or not they can bring little Billy at age 4 to go see this. They're like, yeah, no, it's going to be fine. Like, this is something that he's going to get something out of just as much as the older kids would as well.
Yeah. Even and technically they do bang in that first movie, but it's weird tail sex, so it doesn't that was the MPAA doesn't get upset about it.
That was cut from at least some versions of it, so we don't have to worry about that specifically.
That's fine.
Yeah. One thing, just a comment before we leave though, is I agree with you that I don't think any characters from this are ever going to be notable. However, I do think if you show just the general concept art of the Na'vi, everyone's going to know what that is from, at least. Everyone's going to be able to recognize, oh, that's from Avatar.
I think that, and I think also if you show like the floating mountains with the waterfalls coming off of it, I think people will say that's Pandora. I think those are the things that'll make it stick.
I think yes, unless you just happen to get someone who's like really into high fantasy, like Dungeons and Dragons sort of stuff. They might be able to say like, oh, that's from something else.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone's going to hear Pandora and go, Borderlands? Are we talking about Borderlands? Are you a Vault Hunter?
Goody. I can't even remember the name of like their Phoenix God thing from that movie, and I just watched it less than 2 months ago.
Isn't it just the Phoenix? I mean, I don't know.
Is it?
I don't know.
I thought it had a more specific name.
No, Firebird. Was it Firebird?
That sounds right.
Yeah, something like that. Anyway, I obviously, yeah, like they're not like infallible movies. Unobtainium was a stupid name in the first movie. Like, it's not. I'm not saying there's not things to critique here, but I do think if you let yourself get into it, there's a bit of a magic to the Avatar movies, especially the second one, which I do think is better from a script perspective, from a character perspective. I think it does more complex things. Not too complex. I'm not saying it's like a super complex movie, but it's more complex than just doing the the Pocahontas style story the first one did.
Right.
And I think, I remember like Cameron even saying in an interview at one point that, hey, the whole idea is that the first one's to introduce to this new world, so the story's intentionally very simple and something that people can just, immediately get because it's just a classic story. But then you start doing more complex things with it once you've got everyone kind of in the door and,
Yeah. Avatar 5 will be trade negotiations and politics.
Don't even joke about that, okay? Don't even joke.
Hey, you wanted the more complicated stuff. That's apparently where we go.
That's not the more complicated stuff. That's the creator losing his goddamn mind, is what that is.
Yep.
All right, so that's number 2, which leads us to number 1. The movie we agreed, quite quickly, might I add, was the number 1 sci-fi movie from this half of the decade, the first half of the 2020s. And that is Godzilla Minus One.
Yes.
Which makes me very happy that a Godzilla movie is good enough to even be in consideration for this slot.
Oh, yeah.
Makes me very, very happy.
Absolutely. I mean, even if I'm looking down, I'm on the Godzilla Minus One IMDb page, and it says more like this, and I see the MonsterVerse beginnings, I see Shin Godzilla's on here, but like all of those are good. The beginning of the MonsterVerse was, and even later MonsterVerse is fun, but this one felt like it was tapping into that same vein that Godzilla 54 was. It's tapping into that same sort of like the anxiety of a people that just got out of a war, and you get this creature that is essentially the iconography of your loss in that war. And it's just this beautiful thing of the human spirit. It's this beautiful thing of even how they take down the creature, or at least try to in the earlier scenes, is very much like Jaws reminiscent, stuff like that. So I really do appreciate all the different threads they were pulling on here that made Godzilla really entertaining again.
Yeah, it's like, I think unlike a lot of monster movies and Godzilla movies in particular, compelling main character who has like an arc that really works over the course of the movie. It felt like it had something to say about how Japan treated its soldiers. That's what I mean. The whole idea that the main character is a kamikaze pilot. This idea that you're expected to give your life, and then sort of dealing with the psychology of that and how he feels that he never actually got to do that, and kind of thing. Like exploring that, and I think that's a really cool framework. And then just these general ideas that you're playing with, that it doesn't seem like the nuclear bombs went off in this movie. It felt like Godzilla's replaced that instead. Like, Godzilla came instead of the atomic bombs, and that's kind of an interesting little pivot. Godzilla's big attack on Tokyo is effectively a remake of the first attack in the original Godzilla, and it kind of felt like, oh yeah, this is kind of fun because it's like, oh, okay, they very limited in 1954 with what they could do with a guy in a suit and miniatures and so on. Here we're going to do it in modern effects that are really high quality, and we're going to the idea that in the original Godzilla, like, he picks up a train at one point. Well, in this movie, we're going to be inside that train, and we're going to see people dangling from inside it, and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like is the smartest thing about this movie, is that a lot of times when you do something that is a half remake, half reimagining sort of thing, they pick the moments, they redo the moments, but they don't ask, why was that something that worked for original audiences? What I feel like this movie did was it picked those moments and said, why did that work? And then it managed to evolve it in a way that it would work in that same way for modern audiences. So whereas in the old 1950s, like, yeah, he picks up the train, but like, there's not a lot they could do with the 50s budget. This one, they pick up the train and they say, what is a modern audience expecting from that? And then they do it.
Yeah. It looks fantastic. Great score, which obviously uses some of the classic Godzilla themes and does new things with them. Compelling characters, makes Godzilla feel like a big deal in a way that he doesn't always, right? And it's so good that you kind of come out of it going, oh, this might actually be the second best Godzilla movie. Like, the original's the only one that I think I know for sure is better. There's a lot of good sequels. There's a lot of fun, like, goofy ones where he's fighting different types of monsters. I like the 2014 Godzilla because I think the movie looks great, and I love how it plays with the idea of San Francisco turning into this hell dimension when they're like dropping into it and all that. But this is the full package. This is a character to care about, that you're rooting for by the end. There's uplifting moments. There's a message behind it. I don't know. Like, I just, this was special getting to see this because I'd never seen a Japanese Godzilla movie in the theater before, and there wasn't a lot of showings, and I didn't think we were going to get to do it until it was at home video. But my local theater added a couple, and I'm like, I'm even though it's at a weird time that I hate going to the movies at, I'm making an effort to go to this nighttime showing because I want to see this. And the theater was packed, and people actually clapped at the end, which is, I mean, maybe it happens if you go like a Saturday night when it's full, but like, that's very rare in the UK. You do not hear that. But this was a room full of people who came to see a Japanese Godzilla movie, so presumably it's a bunch of either Godzilla or movie nerds. So they were pretty gun-ho for the experience.
Yeah, I mean, mine, I remember it was a midday showing. I went to like the first one the day after release because I wasn't going to try to get in on release day. And I always save my ticket stubs from the theater, and this is actually the very first one I had saved. I think it might have been the first one that we did on these shows that was a new release, for Ace at least. And so I don't know, I just remember the crowd, while there not being as many people there wasn't a peep. Like, nobody was really like not engaged in the movie. Everyone was paying attention to it. And that's, a foreign language film already. That's already tough enough to get full engagement on, but like, everyone was here to see the movie and see it as it was meant to be presented. Yeah.
It was a special theater experience. Like I say, it's the full package, and it's, there's a lot of baggage to this. Like, I do appreciate and like that a lot of this top 10 is there's a few either new versions of things or sequels or whatever, but most of this top 10 is like original films, right? A few of them aren't. And Godzilla is this thing where obviously there's so many Godzilla movies, but this felt special in the way that it was kind of and it's not even like, because the last one that Japan did, Shin Godzilla, we had done for the show a little bit before this came out, and it was very good, and it is probably up there in the top 5 or at least top 10 Godzilla movies quite comfortably. It was very solid and did its own unique things about how it tackled it. But -1 giving me characters to really care about was such a like, It sounds so simple. It sounds like, why wouldn't they always try and do that? And it's not maybe that they don't try. It's just that maybe it's just hard to do or whatever. But it worked in such a good sense in this movie, and it's definitely the most excited I felt leaving a theater in the last like several years. In terms of sci-fi, anyway. There's some comparable ones for other genres, but
Right.
yeah, number one. I said, David, this is number one, right? And you said yes, and we never even discussed it beyond that.
I looked down the list. I'm like, is there anything that could make the argument? But nah, not anything that was even slightly above that. And I know there are people, possibly former hosts of the show, who aren't as fond of it. But
yeah, do you know
I frankly, I don't understand it.
Do you know what Tara said to me when I said how much I like this movie? She said, and I quote, "I think you like anime more than you think you do." And I'm like, how dare you?
Pete, not all anime nowadays is the same anime from your past. There might be stuff you like.
Shut your mouth. I'm not having this conversation. Right? Now, I feel like the one thing, the elephant in the room that people were maybe expecting to be high on this list, maybe not if they know us and they heard our reviews, but
if they watched the review.
But for people who have just stumbled into this top 10, they're all probably saying, "Where's Dune Part 1 and 2?" I don't like those movies that much. I think they're pretty dull, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I could see the argument being made once the Dune. I think it's a trilogy. I don't think they're going to be making a part 4, but once the trilogy is complete, I could see the argument that collectively as a whole, it might be one of the better things to come out of the 20s in terms of the same sort of world building aesthetic that we were talking about with things like Avatar or Creator. However, I think that pacing and editing wise, it's too damn slow. Like, there is no reason these things need to be as long as they are for the amount that we get out of them. I think that is my biggest critique here, is that it just needs to pick up the pace.
It just feels a bit sterile to me. I mean, admittedly, there's a few like plot details that are obviously just from the book that I don't like very much, but it leans into a couple of fantasy tropes that I don't love. But I just think it's too sterile and kind of bland compared to, while it's not a good movie, it's definitely a mess. But the David Lynch version of Dune from 1984 is way more interesting to me because it's kind of weird, and like the set design and everything's practical, and there's electric guitar on the soundtrack, and it's definitely fitting too much into a movie. Like, it definitely needed more breathing room as a story. But now admittedly, I am very lukewarm in Villeneuve in general, right? There's only one of his movies that I really like, and I wanted to like Dune. I really did. I went in really hoping I'd love it, and I just felt so lukewarm in the first one, and I didn't feel any better on the second one. And if anything, because it was the second one that was 2 hours plus, by the end I was probably more critical and just grumpy than anything else. So yeah,
Dune always struck me much more of, for people who liked the book more than people who were coming into this blind, more or less. It's something where there's just this overt too much detail going into it. And I'll agree with the sterilization as well. It for being a planet covered in sand, it is remarkably clean. Not in like the literal sense, but like, I don't know, just visually, it feels like it needs to be a lot grungier than it is.
Yeah, so obviously you probably disagree, and that is completely fair. Lots of people love those movies, but it just so happens that neither of us are particularly enthusiastic about them, so they were never going to appear here on this top 10.
Yeah, I mean, if there is any other movies that you think should have appeared on the top 10, like we said, we've got the breakdown video, and we had a short list of like 20 to begin with, give or take, so you can see what else barely missed the list there. Which
is good, because it means when we get to the end of the decade and we have to make our own like top, at least 25s, maybe more than that, depending on how fruitful the decade is. It means there's already, if we end up with, an equal amount for the back half of the decade, then, all of a sudden there's like, 40-ish plus good sci-fi movies that we might want to throw into a list. But the good thing is,
I can get myself another Planet of the Apes movie out of this decade, I'll take it.
The good thing is, though, is that if you do love Dune, it's almost a nice thing that we didn't waste a slot or 2 slots even on them, because it means there was more to recommend that you might not know as well. So, hey.
Take this more as a recommendation rather than a, we actually think this. But if you agree with us, then yes, we actually think this.
Yes. And obviously, if each of us made their own individual list, it'd be a little bit different, as kind of pointed out in a couple of the picks. But that is our top 10. That is the Atomic Cinema Experiment top 10 sci-fi movies of the first half of the 2020s. So yeah, hopefully that sounds like a fun list to people, and you enjoyed us revealing so. If you want to see us like debate and come up with this list, that is a video that will be on our Patreon, available for YouTube members around the same time this goes out to the public. So if that sounds like a fun thing and you want to support all the content and help all of it keep coming, you can do that over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or like I said, via YouTube membership. Any support is greatly appreciated. But that is us. So this is the second Ace we put out this week, because the Collector's Cut stole a slot from it last week. But we will be back next week in our regular Tuesday slot with the new Predator animated movie, Predator Killer of Killers. So look forward to that, and we'll see how that turns out.
All right.
And for Collector's Cut, we're starting a new season of that next Saturday, which is going to be Superman season. We're going to work our way through the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, building up, of course, to the new film coming out early July. So
yep,
lots of fun stuff to look forward to. But that is us. That is the show. So thank you very much for joining, and we'll see you next time. Keep watching Science Fiction and Computer ad Salsa.